The billionaire's wrists were cuffed, and the chain sang in the rain. He stared at a girl with a red thread on her wrist, as if the string held a verdict. Above them, a tower gathered clouds like witnesses. A face on a magazine cover smiled, while a man inside the tower cried. The voice in the glass said, "He built an empire, but he couldn't save her." Evan Mercer said, "Name the cost," and the city answered with sirens. The girl lifted her chin, brave as a match in wind. The billionaire blinked, a soldier who lost the map. Cameras flashed and made the drizzle feel electric. In a quiet service corridor, a forgotten box waited. Paper breathes when it remembers, and this paper was waking up. Evan said, "If truth is the bill, send it to my desk." The elevator sighed like it knew the verdict already. The rain wrote on the glass, and Evan traced the letters it didn't know. He remembered the first loan and the last promise. The phone buzzed like a bee trapped in crystal. Evan Mercer said, "If the truth is coming, let it be clean." The city answered with a siren that failed to pick a side. He saw his face on a cover and wondered who that man served. He felt the room tilt toward a storage floor he rarely visited. A voice in his head said, "He built an empire, but he couldn't save her." He pictured a child's red thread like a stop sign for liars. The night crew vacuumed a distant hall, as if tidying a verdict. He wiped his eyes and left a clean oval in the condensation. He pocketed the keycard for a level he never needed before. Evan said, "I won't wait for the elevator to tell me who I am." The storage corridors smelled like dust and old heat. Evan's shoes sounded louder than his heartbeat. He found the box by a cable tray, taped once, then forgotten. Evan Mercer said, "What did I hide and call efficiency?" The lid sighed, a polite ghost. Paper waited like a witness with a good memory. He saw corners of photographs, browned at the edges, patient as judges. Somewhere above, the building exhaled. He thought of the cuffed billionaire and the small, brave chin. A single shaft of morning found the box, as if the sun had a search warrant. He knelt and felt the floor grit mark his knees. He said, "If this hurts, it will hurt toward the light." The first photo rose like a verdict, warming its voice. The photograph showed a discount counter under humming lights. A woman pleaded with dignity, jaw set, hands folded. A little girl sat alone on a cracked plastic chair. Evan Mercer said, "I know that chair," though he didn't, not yet. Behind them, a convex mirror watched in silence. In its curve, a tall figure lingered like a rumor. The date stamp was older than his company by decades. Memory shuffled, dealing him a card he had never drawn. He tasted metal, the way panic flavors breath. The girl's wrist wore a thread, bright as an alarm. The counter's laminate had swirls like currents. Evan said, "If I owe anyone, tell me their name." The mirror kept its secret the way glass keeps fingerprints. The second photograph lay beneath the first, heavier with shadow. The same mirror held more shape now, a suit, a profile, a patient stance. Evan Mercer said, "You were there," to a ghost he had not named. Rain clicked on the ductwork like fingernails. The building hummed a note that felt like doubt. He imagined the boardroom chairs aligning into a jury. He remembered his face on the cover and felt smaller than the frame. The girl's thread burned in his mind like a fuse. He slipped both photos into his pocket, close to the ribs that kept him honest. The corridor light flickered, then steadied. Evan said, "I will not let silence spend me." He stood, taller, but carrying more gravity than before. The discount store hummed like a tired hive, and Evan watched his mother bargain for hours she didn't have. Claire Mercer said, "I can learn fast," and the manager held the form like a damp match. Evan said, "I'll be quiet," and he folded his knees under a cracked plastic chair. The fluorescent lights buzzed over dented shelves, and a register that coughed coins. Shame sat beside him, small and heavy, pretending to be a backpack. The manager said, "We are fully staffed," with eyes that avoided her courage. Claire said, "I'll sweep, I'll stock," and she straightened her shoulders as if iron lived there. Evan counted the scuffs on the floor and promised to never ask permission to breathe. The convex mirror watched everyone and told the truth with a warped smile. Claire said, "We will be okay," and he believed her because he had to. Outside, rain began, and the ceiling ticked like a clock he couldn't see. Evan said, "One day I will buy time," and the vow fit inside him like a key. Years later, a lobby guard taught him the geometry of refusal. Young Evan stood in a thrift suit while the turnstile blinked red like a slow accusation. The guard said, "Blue badges only," and the words landed like coins. Evan Mercer said, "Understood," and tucked his resume deeper into a thin folder. Elevators rose without him, counting opportunities he could hear but not hold. Streetlight yellow smeared across marble like cheap gold. He looked at the conference floor through glass and memorized the table's length. The building exhaled conditioned air that smelled like someone else's future. He flattened the crease in his sleeve to stop his hands from shaking. A screen behind the desk looped success stories that felt like riddles. He stepped into the night, and the doors closed with surgical kindness. Evan said, "I'll build a door they can't lock." The apartment was a shoebox, with a window that believed in ships. Evan mapped routes on a thrift whiteboard until the markers ran thin. He wrote code that turned guesswork into arteries. Evan Mercer said, "Move the cargo, and we move the world," and the cursor waited like a drummer. Pot of burnt coffee kept the night from folding him in half. He missed calls and made promises to a future he could almost hear. The fan ticked like a metronome for stubborn hope. A cheap map curled at the corners and learned the coastline of his hands. He fed the model bad data and watched it learn to forgive. The radiator hissed when a breakthrough arrived, as if it approved. He sent the first email to a port that never answered him before. Evan said, "Tell me yes with results, not applause." The first time he held his daughter, the room shrank to 2 heartbeats. Nora said, "She's perfect," and the word felt like land after weeks at sea. He named her Maya because the name fit in a whisper. Maya gripped his finger and taught him a scale of mercy. Evan Mercer said, "Numbers must serve people," and the vow tasted clean. On a later spring day, he tied a small red thread around her wrist. Maya said, "Is it magic?" And he said, "Only if we keep our promises." The park wind braided her hair and carried his fear away. He counted swings instead of metrics and called it profit. A squirrel watched like an auditor from a low branch. Nora laughed at grass stains that would never threaten a ledger. Evan said, "If I ever choose a throne over you, stop me." Opportunity arrived in polished shoes and careful pauses. Anton Vale said, "I can place your idea where it must be seen," and the room shifted. Evan Mercer said, "I will not sell the compass for a ride." Diagrams covered the table like blueprints for a different future. Anton tapped a page and smiled the way cities smile from postcards. The term sheet smelled like a storm and a harvest at once. Evan tasted the copper of risk and the vanilla of relief. He thought of Claire and of Maya's red thread and of the chair in the store. Anton said, "Governance is grown-up faith," and the joke didn't land. Evan said, "Faith signs with accountability," and shook his hand. Cameras were not there to bless the moment, which felt right. The window showed cranes turning like patient metronomes. The nights arrived, stacked like invoices, and we paid with hours we did not own. Keyboards rattled as if trying to crawl off the desk. Evan Mercer said, "Keep the lanes clear and the freight honest," and the team nodded without looking up. Caffeine grew teeth and bit crescents into our sleep. The dashboard ticked from red to amber to green, and no one cheered. A small victory walked in, took off its shoes, and slipped out before sunrise. Nora sent a photo of Maya drawing ships, and Evan said, "I will make it to bedtime tomorrow." The servers hummed like reasonable gods, asking only for more devotion. A friend packed a box and left a keycard on the table without drama. He said, "Call me when we win for real," and the room pretended not to flinch. An ocean port blinked awake because our math whispered a new path. Evan said, route confirmed, and the words tasted like salt and regret. We logged a success and returned to the next fire as if joy were unbillable. The sun rose on the glass and found us smaller than our shadows. Evan said, we are not lost, just late, and no one argued. The calendar had a birthday circled in bright marker, and the circle kept moving. Maya asked if cakes travel, and Nora said, they do on plates and screens. Evan Mercer said, I will be home by 7, and the clock smiled like a liar. A client called with a ship stuck behind weather, and the map begged for a new idea. The minutes folded like paper cranes that never learned to fly. Nora set one candle and placed the phone upright, brave as a lighthouse. Maya said, make a wish with us, and Evan blew at the camera with a tired grin. The frosting smudged on the lens, a small galaxy trying to be kind. He said, tomorrow I will not miss the song, and the team kept typing. The building's air tasted like staples and old coffee. A courier dropped contracts that felt heavier than their pages. Maya held up a drawing of 3 ships and a red thread sun. Nora said, we love you. Come back to us, and the line trembled. Evan said, I hear you, and saved another route as if it were an apology. The candle guttered once and recovered, stubborn as hope. He promised a picnic that the forecast would probably steal. Nora kissed the screen, and the office lights flickered like distant stars. At dawn the yard cranes bowed to our math, and a bottleneck unraveled. The supervisor radioed thanks as if speaking to weather. Evan Mercer said, mark the delta and move the fleet, and the numbers sprinted. We should have shouted, but relief arrived thin and walked past us. A friend from the early days sent a polite farewell typed in lowercase. And the message said, I miss sleeping, and the period felt like a door shutting. Nora texted a photo of Maya's backpack by the door with a tiny crown sticker. Evan said, I will do drop-off Friday, and the week smirked. A rival offered our new hire a salary with teeth, and the chair stayed empty. The port asked for a case study, and the draft tasted like cardboard. We were building miracles on credit and paying in birthdays. The sunrise painted the steel orange, and no one looked up. Evan said, this is the cost of ascent, and his voice didn't choose pride or fear. We added another win to the ledger, and could not feel it land. The coffee went cold while the shipment arrived warm and early. A gull cried like a fire alarm, and the sea ignored us. Evan whispered, one clean weekend, and the cranes kept moving. The boardroom stretched like a runway that refused to let us land. Anton Vale said, governance is love wearing a tie, and the tables smiled without warmth. Evan Mercer said, love is accountable, and slid the numbers forward. Clauses stared up like small traps disguised as bridges. Someone mentioned dilution and called it alignment with a steady jaw. The city beyond the glass pretended to be neutral. Evan traced a margin note that could cost a year and half a friend. Anton said, continuity protects the mission, as if the word were a shield. The legal pads absorbed our silences and grew heavier. Nora's name glowed on the phone, then dimmed, then glowed again. Evan said, give me terms that do not mortgage the compass. A director asked for more control in exchange for calmer nights. The air thinned until every breath paid rent. Anton smiled like weather over open water and waited. Evan said, we accept the risk, not the leash, and the pens paused. The clock ticked with courtroom manners, precise and unkind. A contract page curled, then flattened, like a thought changing its mind. Evan signed what he could answer to, and left space where truth still argued. We moved to a floor so high that storms felt like colleagues tapping the glass. The carpets were new, and the view pretended to forgive us. Evan Mercer said, breathe, and the word fogged the window like a small ghost. The servers settled into a deeper hum that sounded like inevitability. We added a wellness stipend and worked past midnight to afford it. A framed mission statement arrived before the chairs. Nora texted a photo of Maya asleep, with a book tented on her chest. Evan said, "I will read the next chapter," and the night kept walking. In the equipment room, a dusty box rested beneath a cable tray. It looked like a misplaced heartbeat waiting for a reason to speed up. A contractor asked if it was trash, and Evan said, "Not yet." The lights flickered and returned, polite and final. The dashboard sang green, and our faces did not change. Evan said, "Growth is a cost center," and the phrase tasted honest. We locked up, and the city kept counting, patient as tide. The elevator mirrored us back as thinner versions, with heavier pockets. A wind gust pressed the windows like a question we were afraid to answer. Evan touched the box once, and left the dust on his fingers. The photograph was heavier now, as if the truth had added weight while it waited. Evan Mercer said, "Why were you there?" to no one in particular, and the silence had the sharpness of a paper cut. He studied the convex mirror's reflection again, the young suit-shaped shadow standing just beyond his mother's shoulder. The date in the corner was a year before his first pitch deck. He whispered, "You knew her before you knew me," and the air felt suddenly borrowed. The hum of the servers behind him sounded like a warning too polite to interrupt. A faint tremor in his hands made the photo shiver. Rain tapped the glass above, slow and deliberate, like it wanted him to count. Somewhere deep in the building, an elevator opened with no one calling it. The lines on the laminate counter in the picture curved like ripples in a pond. Evan traced them with his eyes, and felt them lead back to the man in the mirror. He slipped the photo into a folder, sealing the weight inside. He carried the folder to the one person whose loyalty had survived every market turn. Oliver Kane looked up from the patent drafts, his glasses catching the desk lamp. Evan Mercer said, "This is from before we existed." Oliver flipped the photo once, twice, his brow tightening with each pass. If he touched the originals, parts of Nadir could be his by paper, Oliver said. Evan heard the word, paper, as if it were trapdoor. The clock's second hand swept with surgical precision. Evan said, "So the floor I've been standing on," Oliver cut in, "may have always been his ceiling." Outside, the traffic light cycled through its colors without moving a single car. The photo lay between them, like evidence in a trial where the verdict was already written. Oliver leaned back, the chair's leather sighing. "This changes the angle of every conversation," he said. Evan nodded slowly. The kind of nod you give to a truth that doesn't need your agreement. The confrontation began in a room too expensive to hold anything messy. Anton Vale stood by the window, the skyline glowing like an alibi. Evan Mercer said, "You were there that day," and Anton's lips curved in a smile that didn't bother reaching his eyes. "I've always believed in talent before it believes in itself," Anton said. Evan felt the words slide over the truth like oil over water. He laid the photograph on the table between them. "My mother was asking for a job. You were behind a mirror." Anton glanced at the image, then at Evan, as if weighing which would vanish first. The air felt crowded, though the room was wide. A single bead of rain rolled down the outside of the glass, slow and straight. Evan's heart matched its pace, every beat a question. The leather chairs seemed to lean in, waiting for the next word. Contracts arrived like winter, slow, inevitable, and cold. Legal teams spoke in paragraphs that weighed more than their paper. Evan Mercer said, "The business was never entirely mine," and the lawyer's pause was long enough to be an answer. The board murmured about continuity, their voices wrapped in polite wool. Headline drafts used the word uncertain like it was a kindness. Evan ran a hand over the nearest page and felt nothing but texture. "How much do I owe the mirror?" he asked, and no one named a number. The pen in front of him gleamed under fluorescent light, as if daring him to use it. Across the table, Anton folded his hands, cathedral steady. Evan felt the temperature drop, though the thermostat hadn't moved. The word equity floated between them, stripped of any romance it once had. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass without sound. The market shifted like a restless sleeper, numbers twitching in half-light. Evan took the stairs to avoid the mirrors in the elevator. His phone buzzed, vibrating against the photograph in his pocket. Maya's voice came through. "Are we still going to the museum?" He said, yes, though the weight in his chest answered differently. At the next landing he stopped, leaning on the railing as the building's hum filled the pause. The stairwell smelled faintly of paint and old air. He closed his eyes and saw the red thread on her wrist, as bright as the warning lights on a control panel. "First," he whispered, "I have to decide if I'm keeping the throne or the truth." The sound of a door opening above startled him, but no one appeared. He climbed the last few steps slower, each one feeling like a vote. The boardroom gathered like a jury already rehearsed for the verdict. Evan Mercer stood at the head, the city behind him pale with mourning. He said, "I will speak, and then you may vote." His voice was steady, though his hands pressed flat against the table to ground himself. Eyes flicked between papers, each line inked with consequences. The walls felt closer, as if listening. He told them about the mirror, the photograph, the truth older than their company name. The air thickened, layered with the quiet clicking of pens being set down. Someone cleared their throat but did not speak. The projector light cut a path through the dust, illuminating nothing but the tension. Evan met Anton Vale's gaze and held it, not to challenge, but to anchor. He ended with, "Whatever comes next, it will have my name on it." The silence afterward was a room holding its breath. He laid the truth out like a ledger. "We built on something I didn't know I owed," Evan said. Faces around the table shifted, some in empathy, others in calculation. Anton's voice was precise. "Our duty is to shareholders." Evan replied, "My duty is to the dead." A rustle went through the room, the sound of an unplanned storm. He explained the box, the photograph, his mother's voice, in the margins of a harder life. No slides, no graphs, just the weight of words meant to land where numbers could not. One director leaned forward, elbows on polished wood. Another avoided his eyes entirely. Evan's chest felt both lighter and heavier. "If this costs me my seat," he said, "then the price is fair." The clock's second hand swept over the moment without slowing. The offer came like velvet hiding a blade. "Stay," Anton said, "bury this, and we'll name the foundation after her." Evan Mercer shook his head slowly. "You can't launder memory." He slid the photograph to the table's center, a small and unshakable witness. The picture looked fragile against the expanse of glass and wood. No one reached for it. The hum of the HVAC filled the space where negotiations used to live. "This isn't about her name on a wall," Evan said. "It's about her not being erased." The document packet in front of him waited like a closed door. Anton's smile thinned, but he didn't speak again. In the reflection of the table, Evan saw himself smaller, but clearer. He turned toward the window, the skyline blurred by early rain. Thoughts of the museum trip and the candle moved to tomorrow pressed in. "If I keep the chair like this," he thought, "I teach Maya that silence is a currency." He looked back at the board, his decision already written in the line of his shoulders. The city's muted hum reached glass but didn't come through. Evan Mercer said, "We can't lead on the lie we found." The words settled over the table like dust that had always been there. He felt the floor beneath him stop tilting. The pen in his pocket was suddenly just a pen. The vote was quick, carried on the silence after his words. Evan said, "I resign after an orderly transition, and we will disclose our beginning." A gavel struck once, polite thunder. Anton Vale's expression did not change. Someone exhaled loudly, as if breaking the room's seal. Evan gathered the photograph, sliding it back into his jacket like it was something alive. The decision settled into his bones without ceremony. Outside, the clouds had parted just enough to spill a stripe of sunlight across the glass. The table reflected it like a parting gift. He stood, and no one tried to stop him. The atrium was full before he stepped to the microphone. The company's heartbeat was here: engineers, operators, the ones who made the gears invisible. Evan Mercer said, "We built something good on a broken promise, and I'm here to repair it." His voice carried without strain, grounded by the truth he'd decided to wear in daylight. He named the changes: ownership corrections, grants, the foundation that would not be charity but restitution. Heads lifted, eyes met his, some wet, some hardened by disbelief. Applause started slow, then gathered like rain that finally committed to falling. He let the sound fill him without drowning him. Maya's red thread lived in his mind, a reminder that repair was not a single act but a season. "We will run differently now," he said. "And that is not loss. It's the way forward." When he stepped back, the silence that followed the clapping was warmer than the noise. That night, the tower's glass reflected a quieter city. Nora met him at the museum steps, Maya holding her hand. "What did you do today?" Nora asked. Evan Mercer said, "I made room for the truth to sit down." They wandered through exhibits, Maya tugging them toward a ship model under soft light. Docents whispered about the man from the news, but he looked smaller in person, and that felt right. They read plaques, laughed at the way old maps got the continents wrong, and let the world shrink to a family in a hall of artifacts. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and history. Evan's shoulders eased for the first time in months. He bent to hear Maya explain how the red thread kept ships safe, nodding like a student. Outside, the city kept moving, but it moved around them. Headlines bloomed, then settled. Time ran his tear-streaked face beside the caption, "The cost of telling it." Evan Mercer said, "So be it," placing the magazine on a stack he didn't intend to open again. On another page, Anton Vale's wrists wore steel, the mirror catching more than reflections this time. Cameras counted to 3, just like they had with Evan. The city's appetite for spectacle was predictable, but the faces in his company's lunchroom looked at each other differently now. The quiet pride there meant more than any headline. In the elevator, someone said, "It was the right call," and he nodded without needing to explain. The cemetery was still, the air cool enough to keep his breath close. Evan knelt at the headstone marked, "Claire Mercer," the grass neatly cut. In his hands, the photograph was folded once, edges soft from years. "I should have looked sooner," he said, voice barely above the wind. He left a letter beneath a small stone, its ink carrying the weight of days he could not return. The red thread lay in his palm, warm from his skin, before he tied it loosely around a small branch nearby. The trees above whispered, as though to acknowledge the gesture. He stood with slow care, letting the silence close behind him without rush. The company's new steward, Oliver Kane, shook his hand in the server room. "We'll hold the line," Oliver said. Evan Mercer replied, "Make it kinder." The racks hummed in agreement, their blinking lights like small nods. The air smelled faintly metallic, grounding him in the place where so much had been built and rebuilt. This was no coronation, just a handover between people who knew the work's true weight. Evan felt lighter without the chair's shadow over him. He tapped the side of a server, a wordless blessing, and stepped out knowing the hum would continue without him. His office was down to 3 boxes, and a plant that had survived longer than some of his partnerships. The skyline outside looked less like a prize, and more like a neighborhood. Evan Mercer said, "I'll still be here, just not here." The carpet held faint indentations from furniture already gone, ghosts of a layout that no longer mattered. He stacked frames face down, letting the glass protect faces he wasn't ready to see. The plant's leaves brushed his wrist as he carried it toward the door. His phone buzzed, a message from Maya with a photo of her red thread bracelet and the words, "Don't forget." He smiled, half ache, half pride, and set the plant back on the desk for one last hour in the light. The sun slanted through the glass, gilding dust motes, in a room that no longer claimed him. In a community classroom with mismatched chairs, he stood in front of teenagers who thought shipping routes were just lines. "They can be lifelines," Evan Mercer said, sketching curves and ports on the board. A boy asked, "Did you really leave because of a picture?" Evan paused, then nodded. "And because of what it showed me about who I was becoming." The air smelled faintly of chalk and old paperbacks. Outside, A delivery truck backfired, making a few students flinch. He smiled, erasing half a diagram so they could redraw it better. Hands went up, not for grades, but for the curiosity of seeing systems bend toward fairness. The clock ticked above the door, but no one seemed eager to leave. The Foundation's first check slid across a modest desk toward a union lawyer. "This will help," she said. Evan Mercer replied, "Only if it's the first of many." The paper was crisp, but the weight behind it was worn from years of waiting. Outside, the warehouse yard clanged with the rhythm of work, forklifts groaning and metal doors slamming. The lawyer tapped the corner of the check once before tucking it away. They didn't shake hands for ceremony. They did it to seal a contract no court could enforce, but both intended to honor. Evan glanced at the wall clock and felt the day stretch open like a gate. On the balcony, the city breathed below them in warm night air. Maya leaned into him, her head against his chest. "Do numbers sleep now?" she asked. Evan Mercer said, "Only when we let them." The red thread on her wrist caught the glow from an apartment across the street. Nora stepped out with 3 mugs, and they stood together, letting the hum of traffic become a lullaby. The stars hid behind haze, but their absence felt less like a loss tonight. The thread's loose knot brushed his skin, as if checking he was still there. The elevator doors opened to the boardroom one last time, empty chairs lined like sentinels without orders. Evan Mercer stepped in far enough to see the head seat, and stopped. "He left the company," he said softly, "but never left her." In his mind, Maya's small hand reached up toward the chair, not to claim it, but to prove she didn't need it to sit tall. The rain outside thickened into a steady percussion on the glass, a rhythm older than the building. He turned, letting the doors close without hurry, the echo of the room folding behind him like a chapter's last page.